I've been to hundreds of death scenes, some clean, some messy, all unforgettable in their own way. But there was something about that bedroom in Boise, Idaho, that made the hairs on my neck stand straight. Not because of the body, but because of what was playing underneath the silence. It was a Tuesday morning, cold and overcast. I was called to the scene of an apparent suicide. A young man, Nathan Keller, 29 years old, had been found hanged in his own bedroom by his landlord after failing to pay rent for 2 weeks. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. No obvious motive. Just a quiet room, a dangling body, and one very neatly staged scene. Too neat. Nathan was hanging from a leather belt tied to a wooden beam. He was barefoot, with his arms at his sides. No defensive wounds. No blood. Just the smell of stale air and something else. The faint whiff of cologne. It stood out because it wasn't on him. It was around him. That detail would matter later. The rope burns around his neck were clean, almost too uniform. And as I scanned the room, just muscle memory at this point, I noticed something strange beneath the bed. A red LED blinking slowly. Not frantic. Calm. Steady. It was a digital voice recorder. Still running. I knelt down, hit pause, and pocketed it. That was my first instinct. Not because I thought someone missed it. No. I thought someone wanted to be found, but not immediately. I finished the initial scan, then headed back to my truck to listen. The last 2 hours of audio were mostly silence. Faint street noise. A creaking floorboard. And then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not heavy like Nathan's would be. Lighter. Precise. Then a voice. Male. Calm. Unemotional. You said you wanted peace. This is it. Silence. Don't worry. I'll make it look clean. Another pause. I'm using gloves. No prints. They won't find anything. Then nothing. Not a struggle. Not a scream. Just the sound of a belt being tightened. You could hear the metal buckle click. Then the sound of something heavy, likely Nathan's body, falling limp. I sat in my truck for a long time, processing, not because I was shocked by the death, but by the clarity of the voice. Whoever did this wasn't afraid, wasn't panicked. He spoke like someone taking out the trash. Back inside, I re-examined the room. This time, I wasn't looking for signs of suicide. I was hunting the predator who wanted us to believe it. The door locks hadn't been tampered with, but the sliding window near the bed had tiny scuff marks on the latch. Someone had entered from the outside. Fresh smudge marks on the window frame, missed by the initial tech sweep. I checked the cologne again. It wasn't Nathan's. A small bottle of Bleu de Chanel, nearly full, sat unused on the dresser, but the scent near the body was different. Woodier, stronger, likely Terra D. Hermes. Too specific to be coincidence. Killer wore cologne. Dumb move. I submitted the recorder for voice analysis, hoping we'd get a hit. Meanwhile, I dove into Nathan's life. No enemies. No debts. Just one ex-girlfriend who still had a spare key and had filed a restraining order last year against someone else. A name that made my stomach twist. Dr. Luke Halloran. Psychiatrist. Former military. Zero criminal record. But here's where it got interesting. Nathan had been one of Dr. Halloran's patients. I pulled Nathan's therapy files through a court order. Deep depression, trust issues, suicidal ideation, yes, but never a plan. According to therapist notes, Nathan feared he was being watched. He felt someone was rehearsing his death, like they were testing what would look like. That was 2 weeks before he died. I paid a visit to Halloran. He was smooth, polished, but his answers were too perfect. No hesitation, no emotional glitch. I dropped a subtle hint during our conversation. Funny thing, the killer used Terra D. Hermes. You wear that. He smiled and said, I've always been more of a Dior man. Except when I leaned in to shake his hand. The scent hit me. Terra D. Hermes. Fresh. The voice analysis came back 2 days later. Match. 94% certainty. Enough to open a case. Not enough for conviction. He was smart. Left no prints, no fibers, no digital trace. But he missed one thing. The victim's cat. Nathan had a cat named Murphy who'd been locked in the bathroom during the incident, and on the sink, one single cat hair, light gray, embedded in a latex glove found in Halloran's neighbor's trash bin after I had reason to search the area. Halloran disposed of the gloves during a late-night walk, far from his home. But even the perfect predators forget the tiniest detail. Murphy's hair had clung to the glove when he locked the cat away to avoid scratches. That was a chain we needed. Voice match. Cat hair. Digital recording. Motive? Halloran was being sued for malpractice, and Nathan was set to testify. His silence was bought with death. Halloran was arrested, charged with premeditated murder. Never confessed. Never blinked. But I'll never forget what I heard on that tape. You said you wanted peace. This is it. There was no rage, no emotion, just method, precision. That's what made it terrifying. You see, monsters aren't always messy. Sometimes they're clean, charismatic, well-spoken, the kind that record themselves, because deep down, they think they're smarter than the rest of us. But even the smartest make one mistake. They underestimate silence, and silence never lies. They say most murders are crimes of passion. Quick, messy, emotional. But every so often, you walk into a scene that wasn't driven by rage, but by planning. Cold, careful, methodical. And sometimes, those are the ones that fool you. Almost. I was called to a neighborhood convenience store in Columbus, Ohio. Small place. Family owned. Just a couple of aisles, dusty freezers, and a clerk who had worked there for over 30 years. His name was Donnie Mercer, and that morning, he was found dead behind the counter. 2 shots to the chest. Register emptied. No signs of forced entry. On the surface, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. But I don't believe in surfaces. When I arrived, the front door was locked, meaning whoever did it either had a key or locked it behind them. There were no broken windows, no triggered alarm. Just Donnie's body slumped next to an open cash drawer and a pair of latex gloves discarded near the trash bin. Latex gloves. Always a red flag. That's not a panic thief. That's preparation. I started scanning the scene, as I've done hundreds of times. The blood splatter pattern confirmed close range, likely point blank. Powder residue suggested the killer leaned over the counter to get the shot clean. But there was something off about the rest of the store. It was too neat. No scuff floors. No knocked over items. No real signs of struggle or urgency. Then I saw it. In the refrigerated section, all the milk cartons were lined up perfectly, except one. It was a half-gallon, pushed back behind the others. Out of date. 3 months expired. Someone had hidden it there. I pulled it out. It was heavier than it should have been. Opened the cap. And there, rolled inside a clear plastic bag, was a small folded piece of notebook paper. On it, a handwritten sequence of numbers and letters. AC2149L9B7XS44. It didn't look like a code at first glance. It looked like a shipping manifest. Something used in inventory tracking. But Donnie didn't run logistics. He sold candy bars and lottery tickets. I bagged the note and kept digging. Here's where it gets interesting. Donnie had no known enemies. No gambling debts. No addiction. He wasn't rich. Lived alone. Paid his taxes. But when I checked the store security footage, it was gone. Hard drive wiped. Not stolen. Wiped clean. That told me 2 things. This wasn't random. The killer knew exactly what to erase. But there was one thing he didn't erase. The store had an old backup camera behind the freezer aisle. Not connected to the main system. Analog. Hidden in plain sight. I had to blow dust off the monitor to even get it working. And after fast-forwarding hours of static and empty aisles, I caught a 12-second clip that changed everything. A man in a gray hoodie, back turned, places something into the milk fridge. Not long after, Donnie walks over, opens a fridge, pulls out the carton, and immediately tucks it under the counter. He knew it was there. He expected it. This wasn't about money. This was a dead drop. I took the code to a contact in Homeland Security. They cross-referenced it with logistics databases and hit something unusual. The code matched a batch of shipping containers that had passed through the Port of Baltimore, flagged for possible contraband. What kind of contraband? People, smuggling, human trafficking, hidden in cargo manifests disguised as food shipments. The containers came from overseas and were distributed via small, independent businesses, like Donnie's store. I went back to his apartment. That's when I found the second clue, an unregistered burner phone with a single text received just 2 nights before he died. It read, "One more drop, then you're out." Donnie wasn't the criminal. He was the whistleblower, probably coerced at first, then scared. He kept records. That note in the milk carton? A last attempt to get the code into the right hands. I pulled up recent container movements tied to that same code. One had just arrived at a storage facility outside Columbus. I notified local PD and DHS. Inside, they found 7 women locked in a modified trailer unit, dehydrated and terrified, but alive. Donnie died trying to save them, but the man in the hoodie was still out there. I studied every frame of that grainy footage. The shoes, the way he walked, the slight limp in his right leg. Then it hit me. I'd seen that gate before. One of the regular delivery drivers who serviced the store 3 times a week. He was never on any official employee record, but he showed up in background footage over and over, always arriving after hours. His name was Elias Ward. Real name? Unknown. Alias after alias. But facial recognition got a match when he crossed a toll camera 2 counties away. 2 hours later, he was picked up in a stolen car near the Indiana border, heading west. Inside his trunk, police found burner phones, a silence Glock, and a box of fresh latex gloves. He didn't say a word during interrogation, not a syllable, just stared, cold, like someone who thought he was still 3 moves ahead. But he wasn't. He missed the milk carton. He underestimated a man like Donnie Mercer, quiet, forgettable, and brave enough to risk his life to save people he didn't even know. And he underestimated us. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from fancy forensics or dramatic arrests. Sometimes it comes from a half-gallon of expired milk and a man who decided to hide a clue instead of stay silent. He gave us just enough to finish what he started. And that, in my line of work, is rare. They say a house isn't a home until someone lives in it. But I've walked through houses that looked lived in, even when no one was supposed to be there. This case started in a quiet suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. A new development, fresh pavement, fake mailboxes, and 3 identical model homes meant to attract buyers. The call came in from a real estate agent. She'd arrived early for a showing and found the front door of the model house unlocked. That wasn't normal. Neither was the smell that hit her the moment she stepped inside. I got there an hour later. From the outside, the place looked picture perfect. Lawn manicured, for sale sign shining. But when I walked in, the air was heavy, too quiet, the kind of silence that absorbs sound. The body was in the upstairs guest bedroom. Male, early 30s, fully dressed. No signs of struggle, no blood, no trauma. Just lying in bed, arms crossed over his chest, like he'd been tucked in for a nap, but he was long past sleep. Initial avidity suggested he'd been dead for at least 36 hours. There were no IDs, no phone, nothing on him. But what got me wasn't how he died. It was why he was there at all. This model home had no reason to be unlocked. Only 2 people had keys, the real estate agent and the site manager. Both swore they hadn't been inside in 2 days. Security system? Offline. No footage. So I started walking through the house like it was alive, looking for its tells. Downstairs, everything was clean. Too clean. Even the stage living room had a scent of lemon disinfectant that felt recent. But upstairs, it was different. The guest bedroom had subtle signs, a wrinkled bedsheet, a half-empty water bottle under the dresser, and, strangely, a child's drawing tucked under the mattress. It was a crayon sketch, a red stick figure holding hands with a smaller one, and underneath, scribbled in shaky block letters. He said we have to be quiet. That hit me in the gut. Back at the office, I ran his fingerprints. Took hours. Finally matched to a missing person report out of Atlanta. Ethan Weiler, 34. Reported missing by his sister 2 weeks ago. Divorced. Former paramedic. Lost custody of his daughter in a bitter legal fight. Fired for stealing meds from an ambulance stash. But here's where it gets darker. 2 months prior, a woman named Callie Lauren bought a house in the same development. Same builder. She moved in with her 6-year-old daughter, Lena. No record of complaints. No incidents. But 2 weeks ago, just days before Ethan's body was found, both disappeared. No forwarding address. No family contact. And no one reported them missing. When I visited Callie's house, I noticed something odd. A doorbell camera had been ripped clean off. I went around back. Same story. Rear sliding door, scratched at the lock. Someone had tried to force entry. I pulled property records. Turns out, Callie had listed the house under a different last name. Lauren wasn't her maiden name. It was her ex-husband's. Her real surname was Weiler. Ethan was her brother. Now everything clicked. Callie was hiding from someone. Possibly an abusive ex-Ethan had come protect her, and something went wrong. But if he was protecting her, why was he the one dead and she the one gone? I called in a forensic sweep of the model home. That's when we found something chilling. In the attic, wedged between insulation panels, was a baby monitor. Still powered. Still transmitting. Someone had been listening. It wasn't Callie. The monitor brand wasn't hers. And the frequency matched a signal that had been picked up, briefly, by a neighborhood techie who used radio scanners for fun. He told us he caught static 2 nights before the body was found. A brief phrase, buried under distortion. If he shows up, take care of him. That same night, the system log showed the model home alarm was briefly disabled. For 7 minutes. It wasn't a random killing. Ethan had tracked down whoever was threatening Callie and walked right into a trap. But here's the part that still eats at me. The child's drawing? It wasn't old. The crayon was still waxy. The handwriting matched school records from Lena. That means she had been in that room. Recently. So what happened to her? A week later, we got the answer. A tip came in from a woman running a roadside diner in Tennessee. Said a nervous mother and daughter came in. Ate quietly. Paid in cash. The woman had a fresh bruise on her wrist. The girl kept looking out the window. The waitress said she recognized the girl's face from a flyer, snapped a photo of their car, and passed it to the state troopers. They pulled Callie over 20 minutes later. Inside the trunk was a pre-packed suitcase, a burner phone, and a Glock, registered to her ex-husband. She confessed everything. Her ex had found her, threatened to take Lena. She called Ethan for help. He confronted the man, alone, and was murdered in that model house. She was told to stay silent, or her daughter would disappear forever. So she ran. She hadn't killed her brother, but she knew they would. And she knew if she went to police, they'd never believe her over a man with money and a badge. Her ex was a retired detective in Georgia, but he got sloppy. He left the wrong fingerprints in the attic. A search of his vacation property found traces of blood in a hidden room, along with a list of women's names. He was arrested without incident. Still swears it was all a setup. But I don't care what he swears. Ethan Weiler died protecting the only family he had left. And without his body being found by accident, no one would have known the truth. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's tucked inside a model house, on a street where everything looks perfect until you open the wrong door. And when you do, you better be ready for what's waiting upstairs. Some scenes haunt you not because of what you see, but because of what you smell. The call came from a townhouse complex in Spokane, Washington. A fire had broken out in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. Quick, controlled. Just one bedroom scorched. No smoke damage to the rest of the property. The fire marshal had ruled it accidental electrical. Open and shut. But there was something off. That's why I was called in. A woman in her 40s, Mara Kessler, had died in that fire. Found in bed. The fire hadn't spread far. Her face and chest were partially burned. But the cause of death wasn't smoke inhalation. It was cardiac arrest. Her body had no soot in the lungs. Here's where it gets strange. The eyelashes on her right eye were singed, but the ones on her left were untouched. I stood in that bedroom longer than usual. The fire had started near the power outlet, or so it seemed. But I'd worked arson scenes before. Fires tell a story with direction, intensity, and pattern. And this fire didn't tell one. It hid one. The char pattern rose unnaturally from the baseboard to mattress, stopping right at her body. No upward spread. No ignition point that made sense. And Mara? She was found face up, arms by her side, like she'd accepted it, or hadn't seen it coming. The neighbors were too sleepy to notice anything. Except one. An older woman next door said she'd heard a sharp, muffled pop around 2:40 a.m. Not a scream, just a pop. I pulled the autopsy report. Cardiac arrest, yes. But the pathologist had flagged something strange. Trace chemicals around a nasal cavity and eyelashes, butane mixed with paraffin residue. That's not how fires start on their own. That's how they're started. And that's when the case flipped. I went back to the townhouse, walked the hallway, checked every outlet, traced every inch of wiring, and then I opened her bathroom cabinet. Inside, lined up neatly, were 6 empty lighters. Not gas station cheap ones. No, these were high-end metal, refillable. One still had some fuel inside. I found a set of emails on her laptop. One stood out. He always said I was too close to fire. I never thought he meant it literally. I tracked the sender, her therapist. Mara had been in weekly sessions for PTSD. 6 years ago, she was one of the few survivors of a house explosion in Montana. Gas leak. Her fiancé at the time didn't make it. I contacted the therapist. She confirmed what I feared. Mara had reported someone was following her, watching her windows at night, leaving burned matches on her doorstep. Everyone thought it was in her head. Until now, I pulled surveillance from a neighborhood's only working street camera. Around 2:33 a.m., a man in a hoodie walks toward her unit. He doesn't go in, but he stands by her garage, waiting. Then 2:40 a.m., he's gone. That same man was seen earlier that day at a hardware store downtown, buying lighter fluid and a cheap phone charger. A burner purchase, paid in cash. I canvassed the block again. A delivery driver remembered him. Said he'd seen the guy weeks earlier, always late at night, always near Mara's unit. We released a composite sketch. No hits. But then I dug into Mara's past again. Her ex-fiancé, the one who died in that gas explosion, he had a brother, Julian Cross, former electrician, fired after breakdown, no fixed address, had been institutionalized for paranoid delusions. He blamed Mara for his brother's death, claimed she had turned off the gas valve too late. Public records showed he'd filed 3 complaints against her in different counties, all dismissed. I got a warrant for Julian's last known location, an abandoned RV 40 miles outside of Spokane. Inside, we found pages, literal pages, of handwritten journals obsessing over Mara. She took him. She sleeps while the fire weeps. I'll wake her. But the most damning item? A small glass bottle labeled starter mix. Inside, butane, paraffin, and trace accelerants. Same mix found on her face. Julian had crafted a precise, targeted method, a directional fire device. Using a modified USB charger rigged with spark coil and fuel soak cloth, he created a device that could ignite silently from close range, with just enough force to burn, not explode. It didn't take the house. Just her. That explained the asymmetrical burns. The right side of her face took the brunt. She never even woke up. He had stalked her, waited until she was asleep, slipped inside, plugged in the device near the outlet by her bed, lit the cloth. The heat and fumes did the rest. Her heart, already weakened by trauma and medication, Gave out. When we caught him a week later, wandering the outskirts of Kalispell, Montana, he said only one thing when we cuffed him. She finally got close enough to the fire. Some death scream. This one whispered. Burnt eyelashes. That's what cracked the case. Not a footprint, not a confession. Just a line of scorched hair, and the knowledge that even the smallest clues can ignite the darkest truths. You don't forget a corpse that's soaking wet, when everything around it is bone dry. I was called to a rural field outside Flagstaff, Arizona. July, desert heat, not a drop of rain in weeks. The sheriff's deputy who called me sounded rattled. There's a body, he said, but you need to see it for yourself. It was just past dawn when I got there. The scene was surreal. An open stretch of dry, cracked earth, no water source for miles. And in the center of it, face down in the dirt, was a man in his late 30s, drenched. I'm not talking about a little moisture. His clothes were soaked through, hair dripping, water pooled in the creases of his neck and back. His shoes squished when we moved him. His lungs were full of fluid. He had drowned. In the middle of a desert. No bruises. No signs of restraint. No trauma. Just water in the lungs and a face frozen in panic. Like he'd been held under. But there was nothing around him. Not even tire tracks. His name was Aaron Bledsoe. Worked in environmental compliance for a mining company out of Phoenix. Quiet guy, never married. Lived alone. Co-workers said he'd recently taken a sudden leave of absence. Stress-related, allegedly. The company said they hadn't heard from him in 3 days. Last cell tower ping. 3:12 a.m., near where his body was found. I went to his apartment. No signs of forced entry. But inside his fridge was something odd. 5 unopened gallon jugs of distilled water. And on the kitchen counter, a torn-up letter, pieces reassembled by tape. It started with the taste. Metallic. Then it moved. I could feel it inside me. No signature. No explanation. But the handwriting matched his. I checked his phone. All his search history in the last 2 weeks had one theme. Delayed drowning. Dry drowning. How much water can lungs hold? And most chilling, can water stay in a body without dying immediately? That's when I knew this wasn't just a death. It was an obsession. I requested the autopsy report. His lungs were overexpanded, typical of drowning. But the fluid? It wasn't fresh water. It was distilled. Clean. Pure. No minerals. No contaminants. His stomach also contained over a liter of distilled water. He had ingested it, intentionally or not. But here's where things got darker. Toxicology revealed trace amount of a rare neurotoxin, tetrodotoxin, the same compound found in pufferfish. It can paralyze the muscles used for breathing while the person remains conscious. In rare cases, it causes pseudo-drowning. The body shuts down, fluid flood the lungs, but there's no external water involved. Except in Aaron's case, there was. The toxicologist noted something even more disturbing. The water in his lungs showed no signs of environmental exposure. It hadn't come from a lake, a tub, or the air. It matched precisely with commercial-grade distilled water. Meaning, he didn't drown in water. The water drowned him. I started pulling every part of his recent life apart. Surveillance at his apartment building showed him returning home 2 nights before his death, carrying a single duffel bag and looking over his shoulder. Paranoid. At one point, he drops the bag and backs away from it like it bit him. Eventually, he picks it up and disappears into the stairwell. Inside that bag, recovered from the scene, were syringes, glass vials labeled TX5, and a sealed USB drive. That USB held audio files. Dozens of them. All the same man's voice, his own, documenting symptoms. Night 2. Skin tingling. It's moving through my muscles. I keep dreaming I'm underwater. I can't breathe when I wake up. Night 5. I felt it today. In my lungs. I didn't drink anything. I swear I didn't. And finally, last entry. I saw the water inside me. Not metaphorical. Real. In the mirror, it fogged. My breath, it's not air anymore. He wasn't delusional. He was documenting a controlled ingestion. But why? I traced the origin of the vials labeled TX5. They weren't FDA approved. The compound wasn't registered. It had been shipped to an address in New Mexico, unlicensed biotech lab. Shut down a year prior for experimenting with neural agents designed to simulate extreme physical states, like hypoxia, panic, and yes, drowning. Aaron had been part of that team. He'd worked on a program called sensory recall simulation. The idea? Force the body to relive trauma chemically, possibly to treat PTSD. Only, the side effect had been severe. One test subject had a heart attack. Another stopped sleeping, afraid they'd drown in their dreams. Aaron had disappeared from the research months before the lab was shut down. But it followed him. He must have taken samples. Tried to self-administer. Maybe to test a theory. Maybe to punish himself for what had happened in the program. Maybe because he wanted to feel what the others had felt. But he miscalculated. The compound did more than simulate drowning. Combined with distilled water, it triggered the real thing. He didn't drown in a lake. He drowned inside himself. The only reason we solved the case was because of what wasn't there. No water source, no trauma, no motive, just silence, and a wet corpse on dry land.